My name's Neil, and here at PepperDash I develop products including Essentials. Today we'll get you started using Essentials. In this video we'll discuss downloading Essentials, loading to a processor, and connecting the Smart Graphics UI. Okay, so let's talk about how to download or clone the source code from Essentials. We'll talk about downloading first, although we don't recommend this method. But the best way to download it is you can go to clone or download, and you can download it as a zip, and what you download will be what is the current commit of the currently selected branch. So in this case it would be the most recent commit on the main branch. If you want to get the latest release, you click on the latest release button. It'll take you to the latest release here. You can click on the link for the release. And when we go back to the code tab, you'll see we're switched to the tag 1.5.5. So this would be the source code in the state of version 1.5.5. Now what we actually recommend is that you clone the repository. However, the best way to clone it, if you want to make modifications to the Essentials repository, is to fork it. So when you hit the fork button, you can fork the repository into your private GitHub space. Or personal GitHub space, I should say. So I could click my name here, and it would fork PepperDash Essentials into my personal space. Now, once the repository is forked, I can then work on it here, and I can actually submit my changes back to the original repository if I want to submit changes via pull request. So to clone it here, I would go copy this link and use that link in either Git CLI through Git Bash or one of the Git UI tools that I mentioned earlier. And that'll allow me to clone the source code. We strongly recommend that that's what you do. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to download the executables to run them on the Crestron hardware. So you'll see this little tag up here at the top of the main page of the repository. It shows how many releases there are. We could go in there and we could dig through the releases and try and find the one we want, but usually we're just after the latest release. So if we scroll down a little bit, the very first thing in the README file is a link to the latest release. So if we click that, it'll take us to the latest release, and you'll see that there's some commit notes here, or some revision notes, as well as some assets. So this is also a place where you could download the source code, but again, we recommend cloning it. What you're really after here is this zip file. So this zip file contains the executable for version 1.5.5. You'd click on that and download it. We'll talk about what to do with that later, but right now I'll show you where to get the corresponding Smart Graphics touch panel executable. If we go back to the code tab, you'll see that one of the submodules, which is a separate repository connected to this repository, is the Essentials template UI. So if I click on that, it's going to take us to this repository in the state that is associated with that release version of Essentials. So what we want to do here is click inside this folder at the top, and we'll find the PepperDash Essentials C3P file, which is an X panel you can run locally on your machine. You can click that link, you can click download, and this will download the file for you. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how we load the executables to a processor and get it up and running. So first, we're going to start off. I've got a toolbox session connected to the processor. I've got my command prompt here. We're good to go there. So let's switch over, and we're going to look at FileZilla. I have FileZilla FTP open. I have the folder open where I unzipped the executable content, and I also happen to drop the C3P file in here that is the touch panel executable. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the CPZ file, which has the version number in it. We're going to drag it over to our program 1 slot folder. We're going to wait for it to load. While we're waiting for that, I'm going to shift back over to Toolbox, and there it's loaded. And I'm going to execute progload-p1. That's going to load the program into slot 1. And what this is going to do is the first time that Essentials is run on a processor, it checks to see if the file system it needs is on the processor's local memory, and if it isn't, it builds the file system for you. So this is a pretty big help, because if it's the first time you're doing this, you might not know exactly where to put your configuration file to make everything work. And so this takes care of that step for you, and it builds all the folders, and it gives you a folder to drop your config file in, which we're going to do momentarily here. And here it's starting up. And when it starts, there's some important information that we print out at the very beginning. There's the information from Crestron. And then one important piece of information is the version of the PepperDash core library. So the PepperDash core library is the base library that all of the other libraries reference. So that's an important thing to know, because that library version can change if we need to add features or fix bugs in it. And then the other important thing is it shows the version of Essentials that has just been loaded, and it tells you what kind of hardware it's detected is running on. So if we scroll down here, we may have to wait just a couple of seconds, but we should see the console print out here that it has set up the file system for us. There we go. So basically it's telling us that couldn't find a config file, and so it's going to create the config structure for us. So now if we shift back to FileZilla and we go look in our user directory on our processor, what we should see, this loads, is, there we go. So in our user directory now, there's a program1 folder, and inside it there's some subfolders. Some of those will even contain files. On occasion, we might package some files into the executable if they're needed. But basically, this is the folder for the file structure you need. And this is where we would load our config file. So I'm going to browse to my config file, which on my local copy, here's my folder where my working copy of Essentials is stored. And then under PepperDash Essentials and example configuration, I've got the Huddle VTC one room folder. And I'm going to drag that into the program1 folder here. It's going to put it at the root level. And then I'm going to switch back over to Toolbox. And in Toolbox, all I need to do is reset the program. And what this is going to do is restart the program, and this time it's going to look for the configuration file. And when it finds it, it's going to load it and fire it up. And here we go. So far we're seeing the same thing, except now it found the configuration file, and it is going to load all of the information from the configuration file and build our system. And I'm just going to run an IP table command here, and we can see, let me do that with some detail. We can see that it has built the system, and we have two devices in the IP table, one of which is a TSW760 at IP ID 3, and then there's a Fusion room at IP ID F1. So when we connect our Smart Graphics example UI, we're going to connect to IP ID 3. Next, we'll connect our Smart Graphics UI. Here we have the example Smart Graphics user interface. I've connected it to the processor at IP ID 3, as is laid out in the configuration file. And here, basically, we're just going to do a quick little overview of the user interface. You can play around with this. Most of the functionality here is faked. We have some mock device classes in the Essentials framework. In this case, we have a mock video codec to emulate some of the calling features. We also have some mock scheduling built in, so periodically you'll see some pop-up notifications about meetings that are starting that you could join with one button to push. But basically, there's a share mode where you can choose your source to share. Then you can go into calling mode, and this is where you'd be controlling the codec. In this case, we're emulating a, like a Cisco Spark room or WebEx room codec. We've got some fake directory entries and fake recent calls. Some things don't have fake feedback, like for instance, the volume is not faked. The schedule up here The idea is this would pull the schedule awareness from whatever the scheduling source is, the codec or say a Fusion room, and you can join meetings if they have call data. There's an active calls list. So if we do things like dial the corporate bridge number, what we'll see pop up in here is the list of active calls, where if we had call ID data about the call, it would be listed here, and we can end calls individually or as a bunch. So all pretty standard functionality for a huddle room, in this case with video conferencing. And yeah, this will basically wrap up what we wanted to show you for this video, and feel free to play around with the user interface and get used to it and how you can manipulate some of the configuration values to make it behave differently. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification icon to find out about future videos. In the next couple of videos, we're going to talk about how to configure Essentials to get it up and running with different behaviors without having to change the code. And then after that, we'll get into talking a little bit about the device model and how you can instantiate devices from configuration and how you can interact with them at runtime. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.